Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Manhattan, a place of warm hearts, clean gutters, thanks to Phil and Dan. A place of sparkling pathways, thanks to Lauren, Dan, Diane, and Chris. A place of gratitude, a place of generosity, a place of love. We are a diverse, evolving spiritual community acting for a better world, and we are so glad that you're here. Welcome visitors and newcomers. Please chat with us after the service, especially our greeter, Mary Beth, who's in Christmas colors there at the entryway, and our Zoom host, Karen. If you're here in person and have a joy or sorrow you'd like to have shared later in the service, you can write it down. If you're here in the sanctuary, you'll find one of those little bamboo boxes with joys and sorrows papers and pens. We'll pick it up later to read aloud, and if you're here on Zoom, we'll invite you later to type it into the chat. As we settle into the circle, gazing upon the circuitous path between us, among us, I invite you to recall with me the peacemaker. It was a time of great conflict among the Haudenosaunee peoples, and Robin Wall Kimmerer tells this story. Conflict brought only more conflict until war between the nations became continuous. During that sorry time, a son was born to a Huron woman far to the west. This handsome youth grew to manhood knowing he had a special purpose. One day he explained to his family that he must leave home to carry a message to the people in the east. He built a great canoe and journeyed far until at last he pulled his boat ashore in the midst of the warring Haudenosaunee. Here he spoke his message of peace. Few heeded him at first, but those who listened were transformed. His life in danger, weighed down with sorrow, the peacemaker and his allies spoke peace in times of terrible trouble. For years, they traveled between villages, and one by one, the chiefs of the warring nations came to accept the message of peace. Eventually, the nations agreed to bury the hatchet and live by the great law of peace, which sets out right relations among all peoples and with the natural world. The great law of peace belongs to all humans, regardless of where their ancestors are indigenous. It belongs to us. Though it cannot be captured in words, each people gives it voice in the language of their generation and place. And later today, we will have a reading of the UU Fellowship of Manhattan Covenant of Right Relations, our words for this law. But for now, I'd like to just hold us in silence for whatever truth comes to you to reflect that great law of peace. And with that silence, I will light our chalice. So before the kids go to class, we have a story. I know you all and the kids and Larry and Mitzi told several Christmas stories last Sunday. Today we're going to dig into one of them, from the book of Matthew about the Magi, which is another word for astrologer. An astrologer looks at the stars and the planets for patterns, reads those patterns sort of like you read a book, and then tells stories inspired by what they've read in the stars about what is happening and what will happen. One night, the Magi were studying the stars, and one particularly bright star made them believe without a doubt that a very important child had just been born, a child who would be the leader of the Jewish people. They didn't know where the child had been born exactly, and so, but they wanted to know. They wanted to go visit and bring gifts. So they asked the king where they could find the baby. He didn't know precisely either, and he was afraid to hear of this news because he didn't want to share power with a new, strong Jewish leader. So he did some research and found a section in the Hebrew Bible that said that someday a Jewish king would be born in Bethlehem. So the king told the Magi, "I would be glad to tell you where the baby was born. But if I tell you, will you make sure to visit and give his family my warm regards, and then make sure to come back and tell me what you learned?" So the Magi went, taking gifts for the baby and family. They had a nice visit. On their trip home, they had a dream that warned them that the king did not have good intentions. So they went home a different way and were wary of the king for the rest of their days. So this is just my version of the story, which is inspired by what I read in the Christian Bible. But we have here today one of the Magi who actually lived through the journey. And he's going to tell his story. So for those of you who listen better when you have pictures to look at, you might want to move so that you can see them, but you can also just lock your eyes on this wise man.
And the camels, galled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling, running away, wanting their liquor and women, the night fires going out, the lack of shelters, the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end, we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears saying that this was all folly. Then at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley, wet below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a watermill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on a low sky, and an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel. 6 hands at an open door dicing for pieces of silver, feet kicking the empty wineskins. But there was no information, and so we continued and arrived at evening, not a moment too soon. Finding the place, it was, you may say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago. I remember, and I would do it again. But set down this. Were we led all that way for birth or death? There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but I thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death.
Sounds like it was a difficult journey. But you were glad that you went. Why? I don't think the Magi's mic is on.
Well, this was long ago. The world was different then. We saw the birth of a new world, but the birth of the new was the death of the old, my world. The stars, we still look at the stars, but the patterns we see are abstract. They don't signal human events. And I'm surrounded by people who still cling to the old ways, not knowing that that world is gone. The new world, if I'm honest, is too unfamiliar for me as well. I'm ready to leave the world to the next generation, but I hope that they learn. I hope they learn.
Do you have anything you would recommend to young people who are setting out on a journey that is going to change everything for them?
Have an open mind, be flexible, be kind.
Thank you. Well, let's sing the kids out with that guidance.
We have a covenant here at UUFM, and it is kind of the core of our how to be with one another. And we just wanted to share part of that covenant with you today. I'm Jessica Sievers.
Katie Smith.
Betty Banner.
So we're just going to read that. So the first one, we value each person's worth and welcome people of all ages to participate in fellowship life. We gather to support each other in our personal and community growth.
Our congregational life provides opportunities to practice working together cooperatively and in friendship, keeping the greater good of the whole at heart. We approach each other with goodwill, allowing for mistakes, and with an expectation that we will forgive each other.
And recognizing that our different experiences and paths may lead to disagreement, we intend to practice respectful acceptance. Since we need to work together, we will patiently negotiate to reconcile conflicts and choose friendship over irreconcilable differences.
Practicing right relationships in our fellowship
Encourages character growth.
And naturally extends caring qualities into other relationships. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to light these other candles. Just acknowledging everything that we bring. All our past experiences, before we met each other and with each other. The complexity of this holiday season. We lit these first during our blue holiday service. Certainly may still be some blue in the community. For everything that we bring. For every way that we are. Here at UUFM, I'm learning the art of a reflection, which is different from a sermon. A reflection emerges out of a humble journey into the labyrinth and out of it again. And unexpected things happen along the way. The title of this service is Behold and Adore, generosity practices for wandering atheists, skeptics, and believers. When I pitched it to the Sunday services team, my intention was to celebrate the Magi for their generosity toward Jesus, noting how it made them better people and changed them in ways they didn't anticipate. I wanted to strike a tone of inclusivity for all different kinds of folks. And then as I was writing this week, things happened in our shared ministry, as they do. And the message became clearer in ways I hadn't anticipated. On Tuesday, I got a call from somebody who wanted to visit and learn more about us. I was excited and said, "Sure, have you been to a Sunday service?" "No," he said, "actually I'm a member of a church, so I go there on Sundays. But I want to know more about you all." Now, I asked him what church, and the one that he named is one I had just heard an anecdote about. A friend who's a student on campus said that she was talking to a fellow student who belonged to that church, and this fellow student said that at her church, they hate Unitarians. I asked my friend if she'd asked why, and she said, "Well, because they don't believe in the Bible." The guy on the phone asked me what I believe. I just heard my response, It's a common preamble for Unitarian Universalists trying to answer that question. Our faith is not so much about belief as it is about action, and we certainly don't all believe the same thing. So I said, "Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I believe in a loving power that is a force for good and growth, and it's alive everywhere. What do you believe?" Without pause, he said he believed in the Bible, that it's the Word of God, that it's infallible. So I think you all know that I have a different relationship with the Bible. I believe it's a collection of oral stories written down decades or centuries after they were first told, and that the people telling and writing them were perfectly imperfect humans, capable of making mistakes and capable of making great beauty. I believe that it's just as likely that Matthew researched the Hebrew Bible and chose Bethlehem as Jesus' birthplace, as it is that Jesus was actually born there. And I think it's a great story. The part of the story we didn't tell earlier is that when King Herod asked the Magi to take his blessings to Jesus in Bethlehem, he also asked them the exact date that they saw the star. And when he didn't hear back from them after their visit, his fear of the poor baby king exploded into rage, and he killed every child around Jesus' age in and around Bethlehem. Jesus was spared because his father Joseph was inspired by a dream to get the hell out of Bethlehem. Now these characters, the characters in this story, have many sources of truth. The Hebrew Bible, yes. Also dreams and the stars. As our kids explored last Sunday, this story is not the only version. Matthew implies that Mary and Joseph were from Bethlehem. Jesus was born in a house, and then they moved to Egypt under duress, and then made a new home in Nazareth. In Luke's version, the couple are in Bethlehem, only under duress. And Jesus is born in a stable, and they go back to their hometown, Nazareth, as quickly as they can. Now, I don't feel the need to figure out which story is mistaken. I don't need to prove anything. I don't need to prove that the Bible is fallible. What I'm interested in exploring is another source of truth, experience, which recognizes themes in both stories. And one of those themes is that this poor family was being chased all over by mean-spirited rulers. It's a theme that resonates today. We each have experiences of people abusing authority over us, and many of us carry ancestral trauma related to authoritarianism at many scales. Millions of refugees around the world have fled bullies, be they corrupt, elected or appointed leaders, local gangsters, abusive partners. The barely believable, incredible promise of Christmas is that out of terror, from profound vulnerability, can rise up a new leader. And not just a new leader, but a new leadership style, which isn't about power over, but power with. Jesus wasn't out to get Herod, but it does make sense that Herod was afraid, because Jesus was out to change everything about Herod's world. Perhaps the Magi, too, were freaked out. They showed up with gold and other expensive gifts. They were men of means, but they were also seers of truth and tellers of the future. And once they met the little guy, they would have known they now faced a choice between an easy life of wealth and a meaningful life of service. No doubt their dreams were troubled all the way home. I like the symbol that they chose a different route. The three kings of the Orient were reoriented. Another theme, then, is the journey. In both Luke and Matthew's tellings, Jesus' parents had to travel in order to bring him up. And while they might not have chosen their journey, the Magi chose theirs. They humbly entered the labyrinth to meet Jesus at the center. Their trip home was not what they anticipated. The Christian Bible doesn't record their reflection, and that's okay. Not all reflections need to be preached. Perhaps they shared their reflection with small groups at home, or with their spouses, or kept them precious in the silent sanctuaries of their hearts. But I appreciate the work of Christian writer C.S. Lewis, who in 1927 adapted a section of a 1622 sermon written in the third person about the Magi, imagining it in the first person. C.S. Lewis is a lay theologian after our own hearts. Let us not sermonize, but reflect. Let us speak in the first person. As a Unitarian Universalist hearing their story, I would love to ask more questions. We are people who speak truth to power. But we are people who grew up in a democracy. We must stretch our minds to imagine how these wise, wealthy men used their privilege to push back against Herod, as surely they must have done if they were truly beholding and adoring and being moved by this new king of the Jews. What was it like when back in their homes they learned of Herod's rampage against the babies in Bethlehem? Did the stars reassure them that Jesus was okay? And what could the stars do for all the other lives lost? No wonder they seemed kind of depressed in C.S. Lewis's telling. I know that many of us are feeling pain, perhaps similar pain, as we anticipate a new national administration of centralized authority. So it's good to stretch our minds to imagine how we can use our privilege to protect the vulnerable. No doubt in choosing their route home, the wise men were wise to avoid the king. Perhaps we too should take a different route home. But no matter where you go, at some point you turn a corner and there you are, face to face or ear to ear on the phone with someone you don't agree with. And sometimes that person has power, and sometimes you feel like you don't have power. I think you're familiar with the quote by Lord Acton, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." And so we structure this institution so that everyone who's making decisions is in dialogue and reminded to take accountability for those decisions, accountability for the effects of those decisions. Just as the political ancestors of this country were intentional about not having kings, our congregational ancestors were intentional about not having priests. No book is infallible, and no leader is either. And in this community, there are many leaders, many infallible leaders, including me. Together, we protect everyone for the corrupting influence of power by sharing it and staying in loving relationship with those who exercise it in different areas of our community life. We tell people whose actions affect us what those effects are, how we feel, what our needs are. We make requests. Giving and receiving the gift of feedback can be uncomfortable. I really like the framework. I've learned it from nonviolent communication, the framework of if you have feedback, start with a non-judgmental observation, and then name your own feelings and your own needs, and then make a request, and bonus points if the first you statement is in the request. But it's uncomfortable, this process of asking each other to be accountable. When approached with kindness, though, feedback is a worthwhile generosity practice for all involved. As I heard music director Jeff say this morning to the choir, we're all listening to each other, and that's what makes it beautiful. We're all in the labyrinth, each on our own spiritual journey, but committed with our time, treasure, and talent to spend some of that journey here. There is no king, and there's no way to perfectly avoid him if there were. In order to ensure that our confrontations on the labyrinth with those with whom we disagree are productive, even transformative, we create covenants with each other about how we will engage. We promise not to overpower each other. These promises are gifts. It's a promise to hold and behold each other. Covenanting is a generosity practice. So last Tuesday, I was on the phone with that person who said he wanted to learn more about us. and who shared right at the outset his core belief, which conflicts with ours. Ours, plural, our many beliefs. As my friend Mariam Sabas says, I don't know what God is making. It's like, why did I get this phone call this week? I don't know. I do not have a covenantal relationship with this person, neither a commitment to engage with him or shared commitments about how to engage. What I do have, especially this season, is love for a story I bet he loves too, though maybe in a different way. I know how to behold and adore a baby, and I know I'm willing to go on a journey and be changed by the divine. So I think I should invite him to our labyrinth. I think that could be an important generosity practice for me. But I would welcome feedback on that. What are your generosity practices within the fellowship and as a Unitarian Universalist engaging in the larger world? How do you behold and adore, protect, care for, and empower what is sacred in each person you meet? What are your generosity practices?